Your grandfather didn't go to agricultural school. He didn't buy premium soil amendments or follow YouTube tutorials. Yet somehow his garden fed an entire family through every season. What did he know that you don't? Old farmers carried a set of simple natural tricks that quietly doubled their harvests year after year. No chemicals, no expensive inputs, no guesswork. Tricks that have been slowly disappearing as modern gardening took over. Today, I'm pulling 8 of the best ones back into the light. Tested methods that work with nature instead of fighting it, and that any gardener can put to use starting this weekend. Trick number 5 is the one almost every modern gardener gets completely backwards, and it's probably costing you more yield than anything else you're doing. Stay with me to the end too, because I'm saving a bonus tip that requires 0 money and 0 effort, but could be the most impactful thing you do for your harvest all season. I want to be honest with you about something before we get into these tricks. A few years ago, I was the most enthusiastic, most misguided gardener you'd ever meet. I had the raised beds. I had the drip irrigation system I spent 3 weekends installing. I had a spreadsheet, an actual color-coded spreadsheet, tracking planting schedules, germination windows, and expected yields. I had watched probably 200 hours of gardening content online. I had read books. I had joined forums. I had opinions about compost ratios that I was not shy about sharing, and every single season, my harvests were fine. Not bad, not great, fine. My tomatoes came in smaller than the seed packet promised. My beans were sparse. My squash looked healthy right up until it didn't. I'd walk through the garden in late summer, look at what I'd grown, and quietly do the math. The hours spent, the money spent on amendments, and something never quite added up. I kept assuming I was one product away from fixing it, one better fertilizer, one new technique I hadn't tried yet. So I'd spend the winter researching, tweak my approach in spring, and arrive at the same underwhelming August. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. The turning point came in the most ordinary way possible, not from a book or a video. It came from an old man named Harold. Harold was in his late 70s, lived about 12 miles outside of town on land his family had farmed for 3 generations. My neighbor said Harold had the most productive kitchen garden she'd ever seen, and that he'd been growing that way for 50 years without changing much. I drove out there on a Saturday morning. Harold walked me through every inch of that garden for 2 hours. I mostly just watched and listened. What struck me was how little he was fighting. There was no sense of struggle, no correcting problems after they appeared. Everything felt almost too simple to be real. At one point I asked him about a fertilizer I'd been using. He looked at the label I showed him on my phone, nodded slowly, and said something I've thought about every season since. He said, "You're feeding the plant, I'm feeding the ground." That was it. No lecture, no explanation, just that. I drove home and sat with that sentence for a long time, because the more I thought about it, the realized that everything I had been doing was aimed at the plant. The plant's nutrients, the plant's water, the plant's pests. I had been treating the garden like a machine where the plant was the engine. Pour in the right fuel, get the right output. Harold wasn't doing that. Harold was taking care of the world the plant lived in, and the plants were doing the rest themselves. That shift in thinking didn't just change how I garden. It completely dismantled what I thought I knew and rebuilt it from the ground up, literally. Over the following months, I started digging into old farming practices, not just Harold's, but the broader tradition of what farmers did before the chemical era. I talked to older growers whenever I could find them. I read agricultural extension pamphlets from the 1940s. I studied companion planting traditions. What I found wasn't primitive. It was a deeply sophisticated, carefully observed understanding of how plants, soil, insects, and weather interact. And buried inside all of it were these repeating patterns, tricks that showed up again and again across different traditions, different climates, different cultures. Simple interventions with outsized results. Things that cost almost nothing, but consistently produced more food from the same amount of ground. The season I applied them was the first time I walked through my garden in late summer and didn't do that math. I was just picking, more than I expected. My neighbor asked what I'd changed. I told her I'd stopped trying so hard. She laughed. I wasn't entirely joking. These 8 tricks aren't magic. They're secrets only in the sense that somewhere along the way, modern gardening decided they weren't worth keeping. I think that was a mistake. Now, before I walk you through these tricks, I want to tell you where they actually come from, because I think that context matters. Harold was my entry point, but Harold wasn't the source. Harold had learned from his father, who had learned from his father before him. He waved his hand in the way old men do when a question is slightly too tidy for the truth and said, from whoever was around and knew what they were doing. That answer is more accurate than any single origin story. These tricks are the distilled result of generations of farmers across different continents and centuries, all arriving at the same conclusions through the same relentless teacher. Direct observation of what worked and what didn't, season after season. Think about what that means for a moment. Before there were agricultural colleges, before there were government extension programs, there were farmers. Farmers who had to figure out why one patch produced twice what the neighboring patch did. Farmers who noticed which plants grew better next to others. Farmers who watched what happened to soil left bare through winter versus soil that had been covered, and drew conclusions without anyone telling them what to look for. They talked to their neighbors, passed methods to their children, and refined the approach every season based on what the earth actually showed them. What came out of that process, across rural America, Europe, and indigenous systems, was a body of knowledge that modern science is slowly catching up to. I want to be specific here. This isn't romanticized nostalgia. This is documented. Studies from institutions like Cornell have validated the underlying biology. The nitrogen transfer, the pest confusion, the pollinator attraction. Researchers now understand exactly why they work at the microbial level. Modern agronomists have mapped the plant hormone cycles behind them and confirmed the timing was right. The old farmers weren't guessing. They were reading a language that took modern science a long time to learn to read alongside them. So when I refer to these as old farmer tricks, I'm being precise. The gardening advice that dominates today is built on a commercial framework. It is designed around inputs. Buy this fertilizer, apply this treatment, use this tool. The underlying assumption is that your garden is a problem to be solved with products. Old farmer knowledge operates from a completely different premise. It assumes the natural system is already capable, that soil wants to be fertile, that plants want to grow, that the biology is already organized around producing life, and that your job is to understand that system and work with it rather than override it. That's not a philosophy. That's a practical strategy. Harold's garden was the first place I saw it clearly. Everything looked like it belonged there. The soil had a texture that store-bought amendments never replicated. The plants weren't just surviving, they had a density and a color that communicated health in a way I didn't have words for at the time. He was doing less. The 8 tricks I'm about to share are drawn from that same tradition. Some I encountered through Harold, others through old agricultural manuals. All of them share the same underlying logic. Work with the system, not against it. None of them require you to buy anything you don't already have. Every single one of them can be applied to a home garden of any size, a half-acre plot, a small raised bed, a few containers on a patio. And every single one, if you apply it consistently, will show you results that feel disproportionate to the effort. That's what happens when you stop fighting nature. Before we get into the 8 tricks, I need to explain one thing, one foundational idea that runs underneath all of them like a root system. If you understand this, everything else will make sense. If you skip it, the tricks will still work. But you won't fully understand why. Here it is. Your soil is not dirt. It is a living ecosystem. And like every ecosystem, it performs best when it is not interrupted. Beneath every square foot of healthy soil, there are more living organisms than there are people on Earth, an entire invisible civilization working in organized layers. This system didn't evolve for our convenience. It evolved because it works. Plants and soil organisms develop together. They are partners in a transaction. Here's the transaction. Plants photosynthesize sunlight into sugars. A significant portion, somewhere between 20 and 40%, get pushed out through the roots. Not wasted. Deliberately released. That sugar feeds the microorganisms clustered around the root zone. In exchange, they break down organic matter. Some fungi form direct physical connections with plant roots, called mycorrhizal networks, and extend the plant's effective reach by orders of magnitude. The plant feeds the soil. The soil feeds the plant. Round and round, season after season, building fertility instead of depleting it. Now here is where modern gardening quietly breaks this system. When you till aggressively, you physically shred the fungal networks that took years to establish. When you apply high-nitrogen synthetic fertilizers, you flood the system with nutrients that bypass the microbial exchange, and the population crashes from lack of food. When you leave soil bare, you expose it to UV radiation and temperature swings that kill surface biology and trigger erosion. When you apply pesticides, you don't just kill the pest, you kill significant portions of the beneficial population that was keeping the pest in check. Each intervention feels like a solution. Collectively, they form a cycle of dependency. You till because the soil is compacted, yields are low because the microbial system is disrupted. Old farmers didn't create this cycle because they couldn't afford to. Their soil had to work on its own, which meant their practices had to protect and support the system. When you protect the biology, your soil becomes increasingly capable. Fertility builds, structure improves, yields go up because the system underneath is functioning better. Old farmers called this having good ground. They knew what it looked like, they knew how it behaved, and they knew exactly which practices built it and which ones damaged it. You are not building fertility from scratch. You are unlocking fertility that is already there, waiting for the right conditions to express itself. That's what we're building toward. And it starts with 8 tricks that cost almost nothing and work precisely because they respect a system that has been perfecting itself since long before either of us was born. Let's get into them. Trick 1. Feed your soil before you feed your plants. Old farmers never opened a growing season by feeding their crops. They opened it by feeding the ground. 4 to 6 weeks before planting, they worked aged compost. Decomposed leaves or old animal manure into the top few inches of soil, not deep, just enough to activate the surface biology. No synthetic fertilizers, no processed inputs. The result was a microbial bloom that peaked right around transplant time, flooding the root zone, with bioavailable nutrients exactly when young plants needed them most. Do this once every season, consistently, and within 2 to 3 years your soil will require less amendment each time. The system starts feeding itself. Trick 2. Never leave soil naked. Bare soil is dying soil. Old farmers knew this without needing a scientific explanation. They could see it. Exposed ground baked hard in summer, eroded in rain, and produced weaker crops the following season. Their solution was permanent ground cover. Between rows, around plants, everywhere the sun could reach unobstructed. They laid straw, dry leaves, grass clippings, wood chips, or any organic material available. This mulch layer does 4 things simultaneously. It retains moisture, regulates soil temperature, suppresses weeds, and slowly decomposes into organic matter that feeds the biology beneath. Apply 3 to 4 inches around every plant. Refresh it once mid-season. Your watering needs will drop by nearly half, and your yields will reflect the difference. Trick 3. Plant in guilds, not rows. Straight single-crop rows are a modern agricultural invention designed for machine efficiency. They make no biological sense for a garden. Old farmers planted in clusters, what horticulturalists now call guilds. A heavy feeder surrounded by nitrogen fixers. A tall plant providing afternoon shade to a heat-sensitive neighbor. A flowering herb at the border attracting the predatory insects that controlled aphids across the whole bed. Each plant was chosen not just for what it produced, but for what it contributed to the plants around it. Start simply. Plant beans or clover alongside your heavy feeders like tomatoes and squash. Add a border of dill or fennel to every bed. Within 1 season, you will notice less pest pressure and stronger growth from every plant in the cluster. If this is already changing how you think about your garden, please take a second and hit the subscribe button. There are more videos on this channel that go deep into natural growing methods, and you won't want to miss them. Now, back to the tricks. Trick 4. Water deeply and infrequently. Most home gardeners water too often and not deeply enough. Light, frequent watering keeps moisture at the surface, which is exactly where you don't want roots to go. Old farmers watered slowly, deeply, and then left the soil alone for as long as the plants could tolerate. They were training roots downward, toward the deeper soil layers that stay moist longer, stay cooler in heat, and access minerals that surface soil doesn't hold. Deep-rooted plants are drought-resistant plants. They are also higher-yielding plants because they are drawing from a larger resource base. Water at the base, never the leaves. Water until the soil is saturated to at least 8 inches. Then wait until the top 2 inches are dry before watering again. The adjustment feels counterintuitive at first. The results won't. Trick 5. Use fermented plant juice as a growth activator. This is the one most modern gardeners get completely wrong, usually because they've never heard of it at all. Old farmers would collect fast-growing plant material. Comfrey leaves, nettles, young weeds before they seeded, Pack them into a barrel with water and let the mixture ferment for 2 to 3 weeks. The resulting liquid, diluted roughly 1 part to 10 with water, was applied directly to the soil around plants. What they were creating was a microbial inoculant and hormone-rich growth activator. Modern analysis has confirmed these ferments contain cytokinins, gibberellins, and a complex of beneficial microorganisms that directly stimulate root development and cell division. Apply it monthly. The visible difference in plant vigor, darker leaves, faster fruit set, stronger stems, usually appears within 2 weeks of the first application. Trick 6. Let some things bolt and die in place. Old farmers never cleared their gardens completely at season's end. Spent plants were cut at the soil surface, never pulled, and left to decompose where they stood. The roots left in the ground did 2 things. They became food for the microbial population through winter, and they left channels in the soil that improved drainage and aeration the following season without any tilling required. Stop pulling spent plants out by the roots. Cut them. Leave the root system underground. Your soil structure will quietly improve every single year you do this. Trick 7. Prioritize flowering before fruiting. Old farmers timed their feeding and watering schedules around bloom, not around fruit. They understood that a plant supported through its flowering stage sets more fruit, sets it more evenly, and produces larger yields than a plant that receives heavy inputs only after fruiting begins. Reduce watering slightly as your plants enter flower to mildly stress them, a technique that signals the plant to prioritize reproduction. Apply your compost tea or fermented plant juice during this window. Then increase water again once fruit has set. The yield difference in tomatoes, peppers, squash, and beans is significant and consistent. Trick 8. Rotate by family, not by bed. Old farmers never planted the same crop family in the same ground 2 years running. Not just the same crop, the same botanical family. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant are all nightshades. Broccoli, cabbage, and kale are all brassicas. Each family depletes specific nutrients and accumulates specific soil pathogens. Moving them to fresh ground every season breaks pest and disease cycles naturally, without any chemical intervention. Map your garden by family. Rotate every bed by at least 2 family groups each season. The disease resistance this builds into your system over 3 to 4 years will be more effective than any spray you have ever applied. Now, before I give you the bonus tip I promised at the beginning, and I'm getting there, I haven't forgotten, I want to mention something for those of you who want to take this further. Everything I've shared in this video works. Use it as it is and your garden will respond. But what I've given you today is necessarily compressed. 8 tricks in a single video means each one gets a fraction of the depth it deserves. The fermented plant juice recipe alone, the ratios, the plant materials, the fermentation timing across different climates, could fill an entire video on its own. The guild planting combinations that work best for specific crops, the rotation mapping for gardens of different sizes, the soil feeding schedule timed across a full growing calendar. All of that exists, and all of it compounds these results significantly. For those of you who want the complete system rather than the highlights, I've put together a full growing guide that goes through every one of these methods in detail. Exact recipes, seasonal schedules, troubleshooting for the most common problems people run into when they first make the switch from conventional to biological growing. A companion planting reference chart you can print and keep in the garden, everything in one place, built around the same philosophy Harold walked me through on that Saturday morning. The link is in the description below. It is not expensive. I deliberately kept it accessible because the whole point of this approach is that good growing shouldn't cost you more. If you found today's video useful and you want to go deeper, that's where to go. If you're not ready for that yet, completely fine. Everything in this video is enough to get started. Come back to it when the season has shown you what's possible. Now, the bonus tip. Bonus tip. Inoculate your seeds before they ever touch the ground. I told you at the start this one costs nothing and requires 0 special equipment. I meant it. Old farmers, particularly those working with legumes, but the practice extended well beyond that, never planted a seed directly from the packet into clean soil. Before planting, they would briefly roll the seed in aged compost or press it gently into a handful of soil taken from the most productive part of their existing garden. What they were doing, without the vocabulary to describe it, was inoculating the seed with the microbial community already established in their best ground. They were giving new seeds an immediate introduction to the biology they were about to grow in, a head start that reduced transplant shock, accelerated germination, and strengthened early root development from the very first day. Modern seed inoculants exist as commercial products now, particularly for legumes, and they work on exactly this principle. But you don't need to buy one. Here is all you do. Take a small handful of soil from the most productive bed in your garden, the bed with the darkest soil, the most earthworm activity, the strongest plant history. Place your seeds in a bowl. Add just enough water to make them slightly tacky. Add a pinch of that living soil and turn the seeds gently until they are lightly coated. Plant immediately. Don't let them sit once coated or the moisture will trigger germination ahead of schedule. That's it. No product, no equipment, no cost. The seeds you plant this way are entering the soil already surrounded by the microbial community they'll be partnering with for their entire life. Germination rates improve, early growth accelerates. The plant establishes faster and draws on the full biological system from its very first root hair. Harold did this every single planting season. When I asked him why, he looked at me the way people do when an answer is so obvious they're not entirely sure the question was serious. Wouldn't you want to know where you were going before you got there? Yes, Harold, you would. So there they are. 8 tricks that old farmers use to double their harvest naturally, and a bonus that costs nothing but could change the way your seeds perform from the ground up. To bring it all together quickly, feed your soil before your plants. Keep the ground covered always. Plant in guilds, not rows. Water deeply and infrequently. Use fermented plant juice monthly. Leave root systems in the ground at season's end. Support your plants through flowering, not just fruiting. Rotate by botanical family every season. And coat your seeds in living soil before they go in. None of these require a significant investment. None of them require expertise you don't already have. Every single one of them gets more effective the longer you practice it because you are building a system, not just chasing a single season's result. That is exactly what old farmers understood and exactly what most modern gardening advice misses. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 8 tricks are you going to try first? Or if you're already using any of them, which one has made the biggest difference in your garden? Drop it in the comments below. I read every one, and some of the best growing advice I've ever come across has come from people in this community sharing what's working in their own soil. If this video was useful, please give it a like. It genuinely helps more growers find this kind of content, and that matters to me. And if you want to see more videos on natural biology first growing methods, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Good luck this season. Grow well.